In the heart of the state-of-the-art, at the dawn of the next stage in entertainment, you found No Proscenium.
You have indeed found No Proscenium, the voice of everything immersive. I'm your host, Noah Nelson, and welcome to episode 378. This week on the show, another doubleheader, this time reaching to two different parts of the immersiverse. First up, we have a great talk with Nate Koch, the prolific producer who has been part of Sleep No More, Queen of the Night, and the epic opening of Hermès' flagship store in New York City, to talk about a career that balances creating art and working with some of the biggest companies in the world for clients in experiential marketing. It's the first time Nate and I have talked, and we have a fantastic conversation. Then Athena Demos and Doug Jacobson of Big Rock Creative are back on the show to chat about the surprise closing of AltSpaceVR, which was just announced and is coming up next month. That's where they've been hosting the award-winning virtual Burning Man celebration known as BRCvr. The future of that particular project and of Big Rock Creative as a whole is the center of our chat. And we also get into some broader thoughts about the state of VR at this particular moment in time. Another good conversation. A bunch of two good ones this week. I try and bring you good ones every week, but I'm particularly happy with how these turned out. Okay. A few more things before we jump into it. On the front page of NoPro this week, you will find this month's call sheet feature, our ongoing roundup of professional opportunities in the immersive fields. This is going to update all month, but right now at launch, we've got casting in San Diego, jobs in New York City, LA, SF, the Dallas area, Lincoln, Nebraska. We've got festival and conference deadlines in Arizona, LA, and Berlin, some of which are coming up very fast. So check it out. You may not be looking for something right now, but someone you know probably is. So give it a look. It's in the show notes and spread it around. Or if you want to add an opportunity, please email us at callsheet@noproscenium.com. Please include a link to the opportunity on your website or on a job site when possible. We don't like to be responsible for errors, so we leave that up to you to do. Link in the show notes. Also, it'll be in this week's newsletter, which is shaping up to be fairly hefty. Remember, if you've got an experience you want listed, submit that at everythingimmersive.com. That is offered up for free as a community service and made possible by our generous Patreon supporters. And we've got a whole bunch of new ones to thank in a moment. As you know, this is one of our make or break months, and last week we let newsletter subscribers know that we need to clear the $3,000 a month mark by the middle of March, or we're going to pull the newsletter behind a paywall. Something I don't really want to do, but the numbers suggest that's the way to go. Saying that, I do not like saying that, but it is true. However, I'm happy to report that we've made incredible strides in the last week and are now at 403 patrons on Patreon, which just wowzers, and are just $10 away from being at $27.50 a month, which is just $250 away from the big goal. I think we can do this. And this is all possible because of, big breath, Mark Wizorek, Mike Schnurr, Rachel Victor, Devin McDermott, Lou Collins, Mike McClelland, Whitney Bronston Rubison, Verlicia, Shannon Pang, Saint, Control Group Productions, Kate, Charlene Conley, Matthew Purdon, Isara Palungtong, and a bump from David Markland. As little as $2 a month at patreon.com/noproscenium guarantees your access to the newsletter no matter what, and helps push back the lowering of the dreaded paywall for everyone. We are just $260 a month away from resetting the paywall clock. And I really want to do that because I don't like doing it this way, but it's the only thing that makes sense. What a position. If you're already a backer, drop a review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. You'd be surprised at how much that matters, and share the articles you find useful on your social media platform of choice. Our recent Most Anticipated of 2023 So Far article and the call sheet are both good candidates for that. It helps immensely. We are always no proscenium, except on Insta, where we are no_proscenium. And as always, big thanks to our sustaining backers, Samuel Mustry, Chris Woolman, Samantha Davison, Eric Shamlin, Elaine, Daryl, Jay Bushman, Jerome Joseph Gentes, Tom Leonetti McGuire, Wynn Thorne, Ryan, David Bassick, Richard Ayers, Lonnie Hanson, the Ministry of Peculiarities, and Jan Budman. And remember, if you want to help out and you've got a company, email me at noah@noproscenium.com and we will find something. And there's someone I got to write back about that right now, like I'm in the middle of talking to somebody. Hopefully. That counts. That counts towards the 3,000, just so you know, right? I'm not going to, it's all one pile of money that my landlord takes. Let's get into the show. Nate Koch's CV reads like a brief history of the last decade of immersive, starting out as part of the development team for the still-running production of Sleep No More in New York City, producing Queen of the Night, executive producing Sweeney Todd at the Barrow Street Theater, and producing David Byrne's Theater of the Mind, all running in parallel with a career producing major events for the likes of Google and the recently much buzzed about Love Around the Block, a musical block party which launched the new flagship Hermès store on Madison Avenue. He is the founder of Enveekay, an NYC-based boutique executive producing and management firm and the winner of Lortel and Drama Desk Awards. Hello, Nate. This is obviously long overdue, and like most things here, all my fault. Hi, how's it going?
Lovely to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Fantastic. So you know the drill. I want to get into origin story and the whys of it all, but let's start in the present where you are now, which is this interesting point where you're making work on both sides of the aisle, direct to audiences and client work. Were you always a juggler? Why am I laughing at my own questions? I don't know. Giddy.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just so curious about how the world works and how there are different ways and sort of fora in which people interact. And so I definitely started out with a penchant and an interest in making art for art's sake and audience members. But I think immersive sort of being birthed in the sort of wide way, simultaneous to this growth in experiential marketing, is something I could have never prepared for. I think they just sort of fed off each other, certainly more the marketing off of the creative side. And so it sort of grew out of just being accidental, but learning how brands, and particularly if you're working on a project that doesn't have to recoup or doesn't have to have an ongoing business model, but is sort of this like supernova that is just meant to happen for one night or one weekend or something like that. That over time has actually been the thing that I've come to really appreciate about those projects, because it means you don't have to bifurcate in the same way of having to, create this machine that's going to run for a long time. It's sort of about being able to put like incredible focus into nailing it, which is in its own way a super nerves-inducing thing to do. But I do enjoy that part of the working with brands.
You said super nervous there. For some reason, I flashed on that old Daffy Duck cartoon where, like, in order to like beat bugs, he like swallows nitroglycerin and gunpowder and shakes himself up and lights a match, and then like explodes, and the audience goes crazy. And Bugs is like, more, they want more, and Daffy's like, you can only do it once. And for something like Lover on the Block, I mean, how much work went into putting on that one-shot musical block party to launch the store? How long were you guys working on
that? Well, the truth is, it was an extraordinary, like sort of in the definition of extraordinary amount of work, from a variety of incredibly talented and wonderful people. I think my team started working on it in April, and the event happened at the very end of September. So I can't do the mental math right now, but
That's almost 6 months. Almost 6
yeah,
months.
yeah,
just a shy of.
And a few folks had been working on, longtime collaborators of mine, Jason Egan and Teddy Bergman. Their company Ad Hoc was sort of the official vendor for Hermès, and they, with Isaac Oliver, extraordinary TV writer, had been working on it, I think, for maybe another 6 months prior. They had taken some trips to Paris, and so for some it was, and certainly the brand, a much longer thing in development. But it was a really interesting one because something on the theater side, not necessarily even the immersive side, but we often talk about how the average time it takes to make a work is really long. It's sometimes a musical is usually 5 to 8 years. Um, and I've always just wondered, like, is that really necessary? And is there a way to, if you think about it like on film or on TV shoots, which is something I'm really envious of increasingly these days, of the idea of like a group of people basically being full time, almost locked in a room together for a certain number of months, completely obsessive and really kind of blocking out everything but that one project. This was sort of an opportunity to do that because out of necessity, we just didn't have any more time, and so it was overwhelming at times and complex to make something that new so quickly with such little rehearsal time. But it was, looking back, a really kind of thrilling opportunity to just have to be in a situation where every day you have to be making progress creatively, producerially, logistically, um, and to sort of live it, breathe it, eat it. My wife wasn't, and son probably weren't as excited about that, but I think it was a great thing to go on a journey with a team. I feel really grateful for the Hermès team to give us the opportunity.
Do you think that experience, because you mentioned you're jealous of the film and TV development about that maniacal focus, and you compare it to developing, say, a new musical, which can be years. I think of some of the turnaround times on much smaller budgeted immersive works, like in LA, like kind of like your pop up indie scene stuff. Folks will
Sure.
sometimes like go super fast, and sometimes it shows, and sometimes it doesn't because these things come together like a miracle. But do you think, having had this experience, that's going to inform going forward how you approach the creative projects, the direct to audience as opposed to the client
It's a great question. I mean, I think sort of two things that makes me think of is, as someone who has worked primarily on larger scale stuff that does move at a glacial speed, it definitely made me very envious of kind of the productions you were just talking about, like some of the LA pop-ups, of just sort of the like Duplass brother idea of like the iPhone movie, and just like makes shit and don't wait for all of the plate tectonics to come into play. I think this year, we have a couple of things we're thinking of trying to make in that way. And partially that was, I think, the excitement of Love Around the Block is just like a much shorter gestation period. But I think the main thing I'm keen to bring on from that period is the idea. We didn't employ a writer's room on Love Around the Block per se, but because we were working so frequently, it had that vibe
work.
of just a bunch of people work. And that to me is a really sticky thing to mind, particularly for immersive, because I think getting the sort of right chemistry of people in the room who maybe specialize in different things, whether it's script or movement or experience design, but sort of locked in a room together. And in that writer's room way, we were able to really like embrace the idea of like how much laughter there would be, and how exciting it is to like stack ideas on top of each other. And I think we often talk about the theater, at least, as like a very collaborative art form, but it's super collaborative when you get into rehearsal and tech and workshops. But separate from that, it can be quite solitary, especially for
Mm.
an author and sometimes a director. So I think that was the main thing. It's just like it's so joyous and restorative to do so much socially in that way. And I think, in particularly for a medium like immersive, it's a great thing we can grab from.
Something I'm always curious about when it comes to the relationship between this experiential marketing work and theater and immersive theater is actually on the audience side. And I wonder if, in your experience of creating both, if you're
Hmm.
seeing whether the experiential marketing audience is like waking up to the possibilities of immersive theater, of experiential entertainment, as something more than just when they're being marketed to. and I don't even know how we would like measure that. It's like, there's surveys we could do, but like there's also the sort of the gestalt of an audience, right? Like I think back
Yes,
to
yes.
after going to Sleep No More, the first time I saw an LA audience try to approach immersive a piece, and they just formed a little circle to let
Mhm.
they formed a little theater in the round to let the performers perform. And it wasn't until someone crossed out of that theater in the round that they realized, oh, I can go anywhere. Like there's the folk
Yes.
knowledge.
Oof. It's interesting. I mean, I think sometimes the trickiest there is definitely that. There's like the practice to going to the works, although that has its own um, double-edged sword, right? Like I think especially something as mammoth as Sleep No More, which really encourages the sort of this childlike curiosity of rifling through things. There are some shows that are so not built with that in mind, but that is an activity so many people love, and if it's that's the only immersive thing they've seen or really encountered, they will want to interact with the world in the same way, and that can sometimes be challenging, right? Too, because you don't want to set up, you don't want to people to feel like their expectations are being not met. But if that's
Right.
not what you were going for, so I think there's that. But on some level too, I think it's very different to purchase a ticket and seek something out and have those like butterflies of either I know nothing that's about to happen or I've read a couple articles, um, and coming into that forum from that perspective, where I think for a lot of experiential marketing, um, I think some people are coming out of a sense of obligation, but there's less of a sense of the kind of understanding of what you're going to go into, and so um, that's something we try to capitalize on, or we try to incorporate into the beginning of an experience, perhaps to try to set people up for success. But it's definitely interesting because I think in the shows that I do and many in this do, we try to start seeding the world and universe of the play, the show, as early as possible, prior to the ticket purchase. And so sometimes for the experiential marketings, it's just you have fewer um, sort of bites at the apple up front, and so it's a
Mm.
little bit of a different or heavier lift in person.
Eh, for a brand like Hermès, I can imagine, some of the lift is handled by the scale of the brand, the deep story there. For something that might be being introduced to people for the first time, I can imagine that lift gets a little more complicated.
Absolutely, absolutely. But honestly, it was such a thrill to make something. That show didn't even really feel like experiential marketing. It's such a creative brand that really operates outside of our expectation of perhaps a luxury brand. It's like their origins are from such a place of craft. The family that started the company is still heavily involved in the leadership and the ownership of the company, and so it almost was like we had this collaborator working with us, which was, of course, an army of people in New York and in Paris, but really the brand, it was like a lovely jumping off point, which isn't always the case. So it was a real pleasure.
As we came out of the high pandemic, it felt like we got a little bit of of a kick of people getting back into doing experiential marketing material. I saw a fair
Mhm.
number of actors who in the immersive scene working on a lot of pieces. I saw, obviously Lover on the Block and some other large scale things. Do you feel like there has been um, kind of a picking up where we left off before 2020 with this kind of experiential marketing? Is the demand on the client side the same as it was, or maybe even growing as more clients get more comfortable, or as envy kicks in,
Mm.
or is envy kicking in? you know? Or are they just
I,
going like, "Oh,
I
it cost how much to reach how many people? I'm just
I
gonna buy some
know.
Instagram ads. You know that I can get
it's
50,000 impressions for that for $400." Yeah.
It's so true. Well, it's sort of I don't remember exactly when the sort of regulation came in that sort of dramatically shifted like the ad practices of Facebook and others who
Ask not
use
to
that
track
similar.
Apple. That was what, 2020, 2021. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was around the same time. So I'd be curious if, like, from the CMO perspective, that may have catalyzed, reaching in the direction of doing IRL stuff. But it is interesting. Like, it's incredibly laborious and expensive to make them. But and I'm not, obviously there's lots of buzzwords and articles about this, but I think people are developing more and more this sense of, like, the analog experience
Mm.
is something that imprints in your psyche in a different way than something you can get, through sort of typical marketing strands. And I don't even think that needs to necessarily be in real life. I think it's, like, live with things that feel real. There's been a couple, like Jay Rinsky, what he's done with Little Cinema, I think is
Mhm.
really interesting, in terms of being at the forefront and trying to be able to make experiences that are happening digitally that have that same um, sort of thrill to them. So I think there is something that, like, people want the sort of home cooked meal approach, the tasting menu approach, like someone has made something for me to go through, and I am carried through it with, my wife has a beautiful line. It's like, with the confidence of someone leading you through a restaurant with their hand on the small of your back, but not too hard, but sort of gently and wonderfully. And I think that is something we want, because we can sort of do whatever we want on our phones at all times, and it's so overwhelming. And weirdly, to go to something that is live, right, and is not theatrical in the way of, you're sitting in a seat looking at a frame, but that you're able to have agency, but it's in the structure of something that feels sort of safe and inspiring. I do think
Yeah.
brands are seeing that as a big opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. The value of it being, you're given agency, but you're not asked to do an infinite number of things. Like, you're empowered, but you
Yes,
still know, you still kind of know where your touch points are. And that can be very relaxing, as opposed to, just being plunged into something and having no idea what you're supposed to do. Some people really love being dropped off in a sandbox, but
definitely.
and some days I love it, and some days I'm like, I just tell me what button to push, or who am I supposed to talk to? Like,
Well, my joke is always, like, at certain immersive shows, many of which I love, if you've been before, so if the front of house has a sort of world to them and they're like, "Hello, welcome," and I'm like, "Where's the bathroom?" And they're like, "The bathroom." I'm like, "Just tell me where the bathroom is. Like, I just need to, like, get some shit done." Um,
yeah,
I always
gotta
find that really funny.
pee.
Yeah. Logistics
Don't
first,
need,
please.
yeah, yeah. I don't need lore. Once there was a grotto. Yes, the one you pee in. I need to know where
Yes,
it is
yes,
now, or
yes,
this will become it.
exactly.
So, oh man. Well, I want to, let's flash back a bit. You were, I mentioned at the top, you're part of the dev team of the NYC run of Sleep No More, the McKittrick,
Yep.
the famed, the ship that launched 1,000 shows. How did you wind up on that project? Um,
It's a great question.
you're
Well,
still figuring
it's just so funny how life happens in these bizarre accidents. But um, well, so for context, I got my degree at NYU in the Tisch School, in the Playwrights Horizons Theater School sort of program, which teaches sort of everything. And so it was quite a comprehensive program, that took up so much time in terms of training, but also making shows, and was interested in directing and design and creating original work. And at some point in my college experiences, I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here, both in terms of New York, but also in terms of, I was like, I'm sort of tired of being in these dark rooms. Like, at the time, I didn't even know what I was looking at. I was being really pretentious and calling it, like, the postmodern theatrical experience. But I was like, I'm hungry for something different. And NYU is a sort of, like, lovely but terrible institution. But one of the great things they have is an amazing study abroad program. And so they had, and I believe still have, a program in Ghana and West Africa. And I went
Oh,
there, and it was I always say it was the best semester I ever had of arts education, just in terms of, and really immersive training, of being plunked down in a place where, as, like, a white cis heterosexual male, being in a place in which I was dramatically the minority and challenging a lot of my understandings about how I've moved through the world in the past. But even more so is specifically, Ghana has such a rich tradition of just communication in person, socially, in every possible way. It's like you're negotiating for taxis. Like when I got malaria, the taxi driver was negotiating with me to get there. You're, in the market, everyone's yelling to each other and talking. And so I came home from that really, really enthralled, but like really kind of in a dark place, because I was like, I feel like I'm even less interested in what I always thought I wanted to do. That overlapped with I was designing a show and sent like a really weird, creepy email to David Corns, the production designer, because someone had used his work as a reference image, and I was like, "I'm obsessed with you. I love your work. I want to do whatever I can." And he eventually hired me as an intern and then an assistant. And so I started my career with David, who is also an amazing fixture in the immersive community. But one of the gigs that he got was to production design a Halloween nightclub pop-up experience called Purgatorio, which was, I always say it's like one of the best and worst things I've ever done, but I loved it because my friends came and were like, this is so dope and cool. And it was crazy. It's like we had coffins and people would go into coffins standing up and be turned around. It was like the first floor was, if you walked in, it was a funeral parlor, and then the first floor was hell. Then you went up to purgatory, and then you went up to heaven. But this was conceived sort of by Randy Weiner and Simon Hammerstein, who a few years prior had opened the Box, which is, a sort of
legendary, infamous,
legendary
famous,
experience design and all the things. And so Randy had spent a lot of time in the UK and had certainly experienced Punch Drug's work. But he would, it was at that time he was talking a lot about like the Mask of the Red Death and some of their earlier shows. And so I sort of got to know it. I was kind of an associate producer on that project, working on different aspects, and was at the beginning of my career, and sort of doing a mixture of kind of like line producing and budgeting and just like general advancing the project. And so Randy, after that concluded, said, I sort of need someone to help me with this thing. There's a show called Sleep No More that's running in Boston at my wife's theater. His wife's Diane Paulus. And he said, we're interested in bringing it to New York, but need to do some sort of budgeting and forecasting. And could this be something you could support? So it sort of happened organically from that. I remember I took like a Bolt bus or one of those $8 whatever buses from Chinatown up to Boston, and saw the show at the public school. I forget, I think on Boylston Street, but Boylston Road, I forget. But just an extraordinary, life-changing. I emailed a bit with Colin Nightingale, who's one of the real masters behind Punch Drunk, and met him there at the bar and got to experience the show firsthand, which I had had an awareness of already from some of the planning and conversations we'd had, but was really just completely blown away. And so sort of the brief that I had was sort of thinking about with the, Randy, Arthur, and Jonathan, the New York producers who were, trying to bring this mammoth mountain to New York, and no one understood what it was. So it was very, very challenging for them in a certain way, but sort of with them and with the Punch Drunk team about how to take this work that had happened in a school. There was also a previous incarnation in London, and how to kind of like remap it onto another piece of real estate. And it was the first time I'd sort of been a part of that process of taking, supporting really, but just, looking at these different layouts and how they can sort of go. And I'd always been really interested in architecture and set design, like I had said. So it sort of just became really thrilling to me, that sort of idea of the play being not as much a script, but as a sort of four-dimensional experience. And I'd always really been into video games growing up. And so it sort of became this like melding of those worlds for me. And I departed the project before it really happened. It was right as they sort of were finalizing the deal on the 27th Street piece. And it was partially a result of like, not coming from an independently wealthy family and sort of needing a sort of full-time job, as it were, at the time. But the sort of year I spent working on it, it was absolutely thrilling. And I often think this about shows. When you're at the very beginning, it's a very special thing because there are only a small number of people who are sort of talking about it and obsessing about it. It's before you've shared it with the world. And I remember thinking, I think this is going to change the world in a way. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know anything. I'm like 25 years old, but I just remember thinking, like, the way that Punch Drunk thought about it and the way Randy was talking about marketing it, I was like, I just have a feeling about it. And the rest is history, certainly. But a huge fan of the show. I am incredibly inspired, continue to be, by Felix and Maxine and Colin and Livy and B and just the team that makes those worlds. And I just think they're so thoughtful about continuously challenging themselves, not making derivative versions of things they've done before. And I think we owe a lot to them, right? As sort of purveyors of this medium, as really getting us started and continuing to push us in new directions.
When did you find yourself crossing the streams and taking this love you have for this form and mixing it with that, the corporate day job work, and that ultimately becomes, doing work for the clients and doing their maze. But was there a moment when you realized that, something like a Google would be open to doing it differently, much in the same way that, before, even though there had been plenty of immersive, what we now would recognize but wouldn't call them, but would recognize as immersive theater stretching back for a couple of decades.
Sure.
But there is something about the inflection point of Sleep No More, of how, Punch Drunk approaches it, because you hear about it on paper, you're like, oh, that sounds interesting, but then you experience it, it's qualitatively different. How Randy marketed it, like taking the knowledge that he had from the box days and making
Yeah.
it just be this alluring, sexy, cool thing, and kind of putting it all together, that becomes this, the Cambrian explosion for this form. Was there a pivot point on the corporate event side where you're like, oh yeah, this is we can apply this there?
Well, like so many things in life, it's kind of happenstance. But I spent a year. I think it was 20. It was like sort of 2015. This was after Queen of the Night. After Queen of the Night, I sort of needed a palate cleanser. I mean, it was a wonderful experience, but I was sort of like looking for something different, and um, helped open a restaurant, which is really sort of obsessed with hospitality as an immersive sort of genre of its own.
Oh
But
yeah.
did that, and then after that, sort of got involved working again with Corins, and he and a company called Superfly were talking about a sort of potential partnership, creative partnership. And so for a year, I kind of worked between those two companies and looking in ways to how could you fuse what David does, which is sort of really, really outside the box, highly creative production design, with what Superfly does. And I don't know if you know much about Superfly or listeners do, but they're sort of shifting a little bit their mission now. But they created Bonnaroo back in the day and Outside Lands. And what happened is at Bonnaroo, which sold incredibly well from the very get go, they found on top of that brands were really interested in having a presence at the festival. And they found that they didn't want the branded stuff to feel uh, like this terribly attached appendage that didn't go with the rest, that stood out in a bad way. They were trying to think of how can we make this dope and cool for the people coming and not seem like we're selling out in all the ways. And so they ended up actually working with the brands to create activations and different things. So whether it was Tiva or it was Kohler, they would make these really thoughtful things. So much so that some of those companies started saying, "Can you work with us as an agency outside the festivals for this other stuff we want to do?" And
Oh,
that ended
interesting.
up becoming a huge part of Superfly's business. It sort of became a music festival company, and then an experiential marketing company that also, was one of the first to do really influencer-led marketing. So to see them and be able to be a part of some pitches and how they were talking to brands was such an amazing experience. How they were able, this guy Chad Isak, who's there in business development, and Chad is like born salesman, but so charismatic and like really a fan of the creative, but just such a good ambassador for the company. And, to be with Chad on pitches to maybe Chase or other brands that you would think of as stodgy, like how they were able to connect the dots for those marketing teams about what they did. I think that was a huge sort of inkling to me of, oh, there is a way to really do the crossover. So the Google project was in fact with them. It was after I had left there and had started my own shop. But it was a great opportunity to experience how different companies do things. I've talked frequently to my team about how Google was the first time I really was using Hangouts and sort of a combination of um, group chats and shared documents and video in a really interesting way. Like no one was sending email attachments to anybody. We were just working in all these work in progress decks. And it was sort of sloppy on purpose. And it was this sort of Google mentality of the sort of stacking things, right? In the sort of developer mindset. And so, I realize like as much as they maybe have things to grab from us, we have things to grab from the way these highly oiled companies work. Maybe we don't want to take certain things from them that we want to keep more artistically minded, but certainly organizationally and the way they can come together and make decisions and actionalize plans has been a really sort of lovely part of it that I appreciate getting every time.
Right now with NVK, what's the split? How much is of your time is on creative, direct to audience creative projects? I don't know how else to call them, but things like theater of the mind.
Yeah.
How much of your day to day brain space is going into the art side, and how much into the business side? And I know you're
Hmm.
someone who switches between the both, but the client stuff and the theater stuff. What's the breakdown in the shop?
Yeah. Well, the way I think of it is sort of like it's a stocks and bonds balanced portfolio in a way. Um,
Nice.
so it's like the projects are, which I usually think of, let's call them like the direct to audience or what have you, are incredibly speculative. And frequently they will take a substantial amount of time to get off the ground. So even if they will be remunerative or just happen at some point, often it's not known and it will take years of time. So we're in a cycle right now where we have a few of those that are at the beginning, which is exciting in a lot of ways, and kind of useful in a way because we're in like a similar part of the life cycle across them, which enables us to, I think, be approaching them in a sort of similar headspace. So those are projects that we're creatively involved in or and producerially involved in and getting off the ground, and I think they will take maybe 30 to 35% of our company's time this year. The balance will be in the sort of bonds, which are supporting entertainment companies that are both immersive focused but also not immersive focused, and really all of them, the sort of common bond they share is they're theatrical in some way. Um, but those are really fun too. It gives me a great excuse to work with people I love, um, and to sort of in some ways like take the general management part of what we do on the shows and apply that to companies. And that's really fun because those are evergreen, durational experiences of their own. There's no opening, there's no closing. It's just sort of continuous.
Yeah.
And so I sort of love that. Of course, I also love the brigadoon nature of a show, and it sort of comes and goes. So for this year, we're doing that. And I think, like I said earlier, we're considering a few other things that would be sort of like very early rough drafts of other projects that I think in some ways what we've talked about recently is more and more of an interest in fostering and creating legitimate community and kind of blending aspects of fiction with ritual and nonfiction and true experience, for people to come together, sort of as I was saying earlier, loving hospitality in restaurants and come from a crazy Italian family. Breaking bread is really important. So sort of looking at like I don't even know what to call them yet, but sort of these kind of happenings or experiences,
And
for
thinking
people to
about
come
them in
together.
terms of as one-offs, or as like creating spaces where they can happen? I mean, one of the things, because that sense of like a venue, right, seems to
Yeah.
always be the the golden ticket to making this work sustainable. And I think you've dialed in on something important, which is the hospitality nature of this.
Hmm.
I often think like the things that have the most legs are when people are thinking deeply about the guest experience. Not only
Yes.
a person as an attendee or as the protagonist or a supporting character in a show, but then just them as a person being cared for on the ground themselves. And that kind of mode shifting about like when someone approaches, the patron approaches, they have a lot of different identities they're carrying with them when they enter the door.
Absolutely. Oh, I think we talk about it as much as you can, right? Meeting people where they are. And I think the reason immersive is so good at that, when done really effectively, is like not all people want to interact in the same way. Some want to be very voyeuristic and sort of to the back. Some want to be more involved. Some are not sure. And if they might be surprised at how they selected, and we do our best work, like this was really the main thing we tried to accomplish Queen of the Night, is meeting people where they are and fostering a sort of safety to be vulnerable in finding out their agency. And so it's something I'm deeply interested in. And I think from the hospitality side, I've read so much about how Keith McNally has run his restaurants and what Major Food Group is doing as a company with all of these different unique brands, but such a sort of theatrical flair. Um, and yeah, I just think there's a lot to borrow from them as much as from the arts or other places. And so I think they'll probably be one-offs to start, but I'm really I can't tell if I feel like I'm getting old and having children, but very interested in sort of seasonality and the sort of here in New York, of course, we have these such defined seasons that make us crazy, but also give us this life rhythm. And so, trying to look at that in a way as something that grounds us in the real world, but also on top of that basis, creating things that feel a bit magical and special. And I sort of ideally would see it as like a series that happens 8 times per year in different
Mm.
places all over the world, to experience it.
That makes, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. The, the seasonal nature of it, particularly when we start mixing with ritual, with just that sense of creating a heightened reality for folks. And I mean, here in LA, of course, we have what we call spooky season, right? Like the time from like late August into like early November, where like all the
Right.
haunt and the haunters go. And that's being in LA, it can be like year round. Like the Halloweeners are a constant force, and Universal's turning that into like a year round horror attraction in Las Vegas, right? Because the land's available
Right.
there.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's still something important about that season, and for me, there's a little bit of that for that season, but also the rituals around a Christmas season, or like at summertime, and like everyone trying to get to beach body readiness, and like all these sort of rhythms, or you go back farther, you go into like some of like the old world traditions, or like say the Celtic tradition, stuff around the fire festivals, and just or the
Absolutely.
Catholic tradition, like the different feasts of the saints. Like all of these things are, it's just deeply human to have these rhythms tied to the weather, and what is the whole society doing at that moment, right? And things that
Yes.
bind us together.
Yes. Yeah, we have these kind of natural metronomes that I think we've been able to escape or innovate out of in some ways to some great degree of joy and fun. And yet there's these things, someone was telling me about the concept of second sleep used to be a big thing because people would
Yeah.
often go to sleep when it got dark out, and then no one was really needing to sleep for like 11 or 12 hours. And so at like 1 or 2 a.m., most people would wake up for like an hour and a half. And I'm like, that I think is probably really healthy to do. So I don't know. I'm just interested in like, we've come so far in so many ways, but I think we have weeded out some things that might have been so constant for so long of humanity that that more than ever we might need a little bit more of. So I'm trying to do that really thoughtfully, and um, I sort of feel like I'm at the very beginning of a long research project of some kind that, and it's thrilling to not really know where it will go, but to just want to not rush it and really just think thoughtfully about sort of what am I interested in as a human and at this point in my life, and what are the things that I think the humans around me are sort of craving and needing, and it's a fun place to be.
I almost hate to ask this next question because we're in this lovely human spot, but I wanted to like put your businessman cap on for a moment because there was something you said earlier that got me thinking. Because a show like Theater of the Mind, it's at the Denver Center of the Performing Arts right now. I know that they're eyeing on that going to like other performing arts centers of that nature. These institutions that have
Hmm.
public and private backing mixing, but like they're art facing, right? They're not
Yeah.
necessarily a commercial enterprise, say the way like a Broadway production is. I'm wondering from where you're sitting, what you think the model is for the creative projects, the ones that are a little more speculative. Do you see some of them launching off, you know, in the Broadway, in the independent, or in like the kind of blockbuster model of a Sleep No More, or is there a line here where we're going to see more in these producing entities of the theater world, taking on shows like Theater of the Mind, or is it all of the above at this point? Are all the roads open?
Yeah, and even within it, theater of the mind as such a large, complicated undertaking. Um, space wise, in Denver, it's 15,000 feet, so it's not like these monumental, crazy ones. But I often refer to that show and others like it as you're building a ship in a bottle, and so it's like the level of detail work you have to do is
Mm.
so specific. And so I think the Denver Center was so many things that even similar institutions might not have. And I don't mean that as a knock against them. It's just sort of how they've been built. They have this very, very experienced production team that has worked together a lot. And so it's not the idea of like I always think of the movie Armageddon when you're like, who do we need to go to the asteroid? But it's like people who have been going to the asteroid together for a while. And that was a great thing to leverage. And also that
Now let's just
they,
get some guys who do work on oil derricks. Come on,
I
like we
know,
just got
got
to
it.
drill, baby, drill.
And they're an institution that is like willing to take some risk, or at least was on that show. And
Yeah.
as a sort of nonprofit, many are not like that, to do a 16-week run when most nonprofit, at least in regional theaters, right, might run, a show might run 6 to 8 weeks at the longest. So so I think hopefully more will adopt that approach. But I think the main thing is, we have a major, for this genre, a major real estate problem, which is the
Mm.
thrilling part is you're sort of building the theater and the set and the show at the same time. Um, but producerially, that makes for a huge capex expenditure, and on the commercial real estate side, a lot of risk for the people putting up money because if you do a Broadway show, like Lord knows the theater owners take a huge amount of the money off the top for rent and for operating expenses. But the real benefit is you're working under the auspices of a week to week license. And so if the show doesn't work out or at some point needs to close, you kind of wipe your hands of it. Whereas if you have a commercial lease for 10 years, like, and you're paying rent, you will forfeit a security deposit. You have a good guy guarantee. You have all these things that make it really, really challenging to sort of take a risk on one show. And so, thing I've been really interested in and probably should be working on full time from like a capitalist perspective, but is I think we're going to hopefully enter a period in which there will be a kind of institutionalization of venues that can host immersive works, almost like rentable theaters in the way that someone has taken the risk, either purchased a building or as a 49 or 99-year lease to do all the, I always say, the things that no audience member is going to thank you for, like HVAC and working bathrooms. Sort of going back to the beginning of the conversation, where can I go pee?
Right.
that take so much and are not pretty and not interesting to look at. But to do that and set up the bar and those things, and even potentially, there's an organization called Broadway Across America in the Broadway space that basically ended up gobbling up a bunch of touring venues throughout the country. And so that's enabled sort of a much simpler way of creating sort of booking schedules for tours, for shows. So I think that's another place that the immersive genre will hopefully be able to take to. But it's going to take, we're at an interesting moment, inflection point of real estate, just like fewer people going to the office. And hopefully that is going to inure to the benefit. But I think there's so much white space for the right ownership group or the right people to come together and make a huge splash in this way, because I think it would increase exponentially the amount of shows that would be made in immersive, because it would just take away a huge portion of the expensive risk.
Yeah, it does feel like it's, for a decade now, figuring out what does a touring house for immersive look like, or what does the permanent venue that can be modded to roll in the next show. All of that has been on the creative side, something we all talk about, and inching ever closer towards someone just coming on and taking the risks of building those out. And we're seeing touring shows now of experiential work, and we're seeing, more being done with less. That ship in the bottle model you just mentioned. And we've also seen, like, Punch Drunk tried to bring the Burnt City to LA, and just the process of securing that, was so painful. They were just like, London, we'll just
brutal.
do London.
Well, the red tape over there is so much smaller than here, and it's one of the things that, because we do a fair amount of early stage consulting for people who are like, I have this thing I want to do, let's talk about it, how can we do it? And I'm always talking about, like, just the permitting process,
permits, baby,
the lobbying, it adds a lot of time and a lot of complexity. And like the Sweeney Todd that I did at Barrow Street, the original version there, you got your tickets at a what was a barber shop across the street from the pie shop, which they were both working on a high street in Tooting. And there was also the bar, so people could buy a drink there and walk across the street and take it to the pie shop. And I was like, in New York, you would get like 73 citations before you could do that. And it's tough, right? I mean, they're there for a reason, but it does put a lot of difficult structure on the works here. So my hope is, a combination of the real estate becoming simpler, and also, New York has this new thing called a nightmare, which is sort of adopted from a European context. But people who are thinking about how to create nightlife and facilitate a more palatable business environment for the making of those things. I hope that immersive will become more and more central to those thoughts, because it sort of touches all the pieces and injects a lot into the economies, but desperately needs the help of local municipalities to make it easier.
Well, Nate, I could talk to you about all of this for a bazillion more hours, but I know you've got to run, and I got to run too. But let's, if not with a recorder on, let's definitely do this again sometime.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
This is really good. All right. Enveekay is the website if you want to get more, and you can find that in the show notes. Nate, once again, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks so much, Noah. Take care.
Athena Demos and Doug Jacobson of Big Rock Creative are the team that created the award-winning BRCvr, which recently had its final official encore on AltSpace, the Microsoft-owned VR platform, which is being sunsetted this March. They're here on the show to talk about that, and to talk about the future of Big Rock Creative. Athena and Doug, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having us. Been a long time.
Yeah, we're glad to be here again.
A lot of people listening to the show know that the arrival of BRCvr was literally the highlight of my 2020, which like, even though 2020 was a bad year, I'm so thankful to have that. Like, very, very fond memories. And so the word that AltSpace was closing up, and that this could mean that what you've built has gone away forever. But I want to note real quick, Burning Man is always ephemeral. And BRCvr, of course, recreates, virtually some of the vibe and the experience of going to Burning Man. And it, out there in the Black Rock Desert, the man is, built up and then wiped away each year. But BRCvr has kind of ironically persisted. But now
Yeah.
the platform's going away. So like this feels like kind of. Well, how do you feel about this? It's so odd what's going on.
I was sort of amused by the ephemeralness of this particular reburn we just did. It really put a whole different spin on it. It was going away. I mean, we'll move it somewhere else and we have all the Unity files. I mean, it's not disappearing forever, but this incarnation of BRCvr is going away. And it sort of really gave us that emotional feeling of Burning Man, that one element that was always missing that we strive to bring to BRCvr. Every time we did the virtual burn, we would be like, how long do we keep this up? And I mean, how long do we keep this world going with the BRCvr? Do we take it down and then bring it up later? We're always debating that. But in this case, it was sort of handled for us in a sense.
Athena?
Oh, that was my answer. So actually, I've had a lot of people ask about, we have a principle of immediacy. And some people think that what we do with BRCvr is sort of a violation of immediacy. And I say that the human connection that we have between people, that is the immediacy. That is the thing that cannot be replicated. That's the thing that you need to be present in the moment in order to enjoy, in order to experience. The venues that we create, the worlds that we create, sure, you'll get to see them again, but a lot of the art at Burning Man's like that. And you get to see that art again in other places or other years, especially with the art cars. But the human connection, that is what you only get one shot at. And we burn our art at Burning Man, lots of it. And to have the platform be burned down almost seems like a bit of pliadipity.
Yeah, the community is not ephemeral. It's just the platform is. So taking all these Burning Man concepts and taking them into a virtual space is challenging and raises lots of philosophical questions. But man, boy, did I feel a sense of that feeling that it's like Thursday or Friday at Burning Man, walking around Reburn and seeing all these people coming in and going, God, this thing is, the event's almost over. It sort of had that feeling of a ticking clock, which was really present for me.
You noted that the assets, they're in Unity, and like so almost like the parts of the burn that are kind of broken down and then brought back every year, or the art cars, or Thunderdome or whatever. It can survive, right? Like those assets can thrive on because Unity's not locked to AltSpace. Thank the maker. I'm wondering, what do you think happens to that energy, that community, though? Because like there was something about interfacing with it in AltSpace. There was a simplicity, a user friendliness to that platform that made it easier to gather like 10, 15 people who are maybe a little bit more VR averse, but did have an Oculus to like go run around the playa.
Frankly, about in 2021, AltSpace made this, had switched the login credentials to be more Microsoft-like. It became more onerous to log in. And it never,
last time I went in,
never worked right. So what we had to do was start increasing our onboarding calls to get people on and go, I keep saying that I'm human, but it keeps kicking. And so there were so many problems that I actually think that it certainly was more of a secure login, but also bounced a lot of people off that could have come in more casually. So wherever we go next, one of the top of the list, besides Unity based, is the ability for the casual user to come by without having to go through some onerous onboarding and check it out. And it was one of the things we struggled with, in AltSpace, with so many great things about AltSpace that we're going to miss. That's probably not one of them.
Yeah, definitely not one of them. Every time we do an event, whether it's BRCvr or for another client, we have built into our budget, built into our proposal, onboarding. We have onboarding for their team, and then we have onboarding for the participants that are going to be coming to the event. And it's normally 4 hours, 2 hours for the team, 2 hours for the participants,
Wow.
just to teach them how to get onto the platform. And I would like to not have to do that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we find ourselves in this moment, where AltSpace is being closed up. Meta is starting to, shutter some of its games.
Right.
Horizon's definitely still like dog paddling into the middle of the lake and then going like, whoa, what are we doing here? And then like, there's no lifeguards. It feels like a fraught moment for a lot of folks who've been creating in VR, even though there's still a lot of stuff that's great and cool, but you can sort of feel we're going through one of those like little shakes again.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on this moment we're
in? I think when COVID receded, some of these companies, and then the interest rates went up, or whatever version of fear these companies had, some of the bigger ones bailed. Microsoft certainly is not bailing. They have mesh, but they laid off 10,000 people in the mixed reality, and so a lot of them are in the mixed reality. So I think we're in a moment of discovery again, where but my whole focus is on the hardware. Is the hardware going to get easier once that it's just all about that hardware? Like HTC has a really wonderful headset. We obviously are waiting for Apple. I just saw that Google and Samsung and Qualcomm are making an XR headset. So the beat march is on. And until the hardware gets more casual and more MR, we're going to be in this gray zone. But this year at CES, I saw reviewing a lot of great stuff coming down the line. So it kind of gave me hope. But we still have to discover where the audiences are in this XR space at this time. And have to survive long enough to get to sort of the casual hardware. That's sort of my feeling about it. Athena?
So I recently read an article, and the headline, it was clickbait, and it said that, Meta had lost like 7 point something billion dollars in their in what they've put into the headsets and what they've put into, and I read that and I said, that's framed wrong. Like, the media is getting it wrong. It's not that Meta lost money. That's how much money they've invested in it. If you just looked at Microsoft lost X amount of money on MRTK, HoloLens, and AltSpace, that wasn't a loss. That was an investment. They were investing in their programs of the future. That was research and development. So that's not a loss. And
I think of, how much money Amazon lost for decades, becoming like the dominant force in commerce.
Yeah, exactly.
The amount of money that Meta can, but the amount of money that Meta can make in the future with the technology that they're building now, that's an investment. That's not a loss. That's them investing in their future.
Oftentimes when I'm reading like the tech press, particularly the tech press that is attached to, the capital markets, like I'm always detecting, how are the analysts pitching themselves off against each other? What are the hedge fund managers doing? Who's trying to short something and make a buck? Because it has almost less to do half the time with the actual technology. And there's a long way to go with this tech. Like I don't want to, I'm not Pollyannish about this, right? Like I use my Quest 2 a lot less than I used to, and that I imagined I would be. And so much of that has to do with onboarding stuff or there isn't something new to play. But even then, it's still so much of what's going on with the fear is based off of, what are the capital markets doing and who can make a quicker buck by putting someone in the ground than by, pushing the technology forward.
Well, Meta.
I really believe that the reason why AltSpace is being sunsetted is all they did was look at numbers in a spreadsheet and not look at actual what's going on the platform.
Oh yeah, that feels like that's across the whole of tech right now, right? Is like somebody somewhere said like, cut. Okay, we're going to roll this back because layoffs are going to make the street happy. Let's go. And so there's been some really great reporting over the past few weeks about how, well, layoffs don't actually help companies' bottom lines. If anything, it makes it harder for them to ride to the next wave because they've managed to, destroy a bunch of institutional knowledge. And so it's that quarterly short thinking all the time.
Yeah, and I would say, in my opinion, knowing, Microsoft versus Apple, Microsoft is more of a enterprise-focused company, and Apple's more of a consumer-focused company in general. Sure, you have Xbox and a few things, but and Microsoft, had the phone. If you look at the history of Microsoft, they do step into things and then back out and step in. Now, to be fair, they've taken they've taken parts of this platform and used it in upcoming Mesh, which could be a year or two off, I guess. I don't know. And so, they were just, there were some other internal politics probably going on. As far as Meta goes, it's an interesting case because Meta put themselves by changing their name as the face of this whole thing. And they were already despised because of their terrible track record, because of I don't even need to go over that. No one loves Facebook. No one's like, I'm a big Facebook fan. So by putting themselves in there, once things weren't going perfectly, or they needed to retrench, or they were investing money, there was sort of a pile on. And it sort of reverberated throughout the XR. Oh, it's all stupid and it's not going to happen. And it's, it's like, wow, that was fast. We got consumed by, things got great and then consumed by the press. And then now it's over, it's done. And now it'll probably just chug along more quietly in the background as AI takes the next spotlight away from, it was XR and then sort of crypto simultaneously, and those both got dinged for various reasons. Not to get into it, but I think crypto maybe earned it in this case, but I don't think XR earned it.
I don't. My assessment is the same as yours. So I don't. Like one of those things is not like the others. One of those things just didn't belong.
Exactly. So anyway, it's a complicated thing. But there's still great shit coming out. There's still great hardware coming out. There's still people in the scene. Still an Apple headset coming out. All the new headsets will probably be MR. Some great apps coming out. So we'll move beyond the Quest 2 as the standard bearer, hopefully, to a faster headset that we can do cool stuff with.
So in so many ways, BRCvr was, y'all's signature piece. It was, for lack of a better term, consumer facing. It was something that, when you popped it up, anyone who had access could go check it out. You do a lot of work for clients. What does it mean that at least for now, the easy access to your signature piece is going away? Is there a lot of then pressure for you to find a space to kind of reopen up BRCvr or do some new showcasey thing on a different platform?
I think we're going in a completely new direction. I mean, not completely new, but we definitely have our forward thinking of what we're developing. We're still going to put worlds on different platforms and produce events. What we have really honed our skills at is event production, virtual reality event production, and we're going to keep doing that. The community wants to keep getting together. So we're going to see what other platforms have to offer, but we're we're also have our sights on creating something that doesn't exist.
Not to commit you all to a calendar point, but is there a kind of a ballpark of when to maybe expect something of that from that forward
Well,
thinking,
we gave a
you know?
sneak peek to everybody at the Reburn. We had several worlds that were open that showed how we were meshing the physical reality with the digital reality and what that looks like and how you can interact with it. So everyone kind of got to see the direction that we're going in. And when that's going to be available really depends on the partners that come and join us, the people who want to fund the project or get involved in programming or development or stuff like that. We're moving forward, and it'll happen when it happens. But if we get a little bit of fuel underneath our wings, then we'll get there quicker.
Yeah. The keyword for me is immersive storytelling. Having been in sort of the LA sort of cinema scene, the question becomes, how can we tell great stories and a lot of people have done that in AltSpace and in VR chat. And then how can we expand on that? We went and shot a lot of footage at the last burn in VR formats, all kinds of things we did. And now we have all this content to tell a story with in a virtual space. So not just play a 360 or 180 video, but be in a digital space while triggering videos and doing different things and telling a story. That's really exciting to me, and we're sort of leaning into that a little bit.
Well, I'm definitely interested in seeing where you guys take this and how it manifests across the various instances of the metaverse. A word I'm not terrified of anymore. I used to love it, then I hated it. Now I'm like, it feels okay again.
It's like an old
Athena,
friend.
And like an old friend, yeah, an old friend who crashed on your couch unexpectedly,
Yeah.
and then you were like, where you were in Cleveland for like 9 years? What's going on?
I got drunk, but then but he's all right.
Yeah, I know, he's really fine. I went corporate for a while, and then I got sick of it. So, sorry.
Exactly. I love it. We could take this metaphor for a while.
Oh, we could. Athena, Doug, thank you both so much for jumping in. When folks want to connect with you as you build your future, where should they go?
I highly recommend just going to our website. We have two of them, actually. For Burning Man, it's BRCvr.org, and that's for everything that we do that is Playa related. And then if you would like us to build something for you, then you go to bigrockxr.com.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Nate, Athena, and Doug for being our guests on the show this week. Check the show notes to find out how to contact them, follow up on their work, etc., etc. You know how to do this by now, unless this is your first week, in which case check the show notes, and there are links in there. Okay. So, where am I at? I'm clearly very amped up about how good the Patreon is doing. Wow, saying that's just frightened me to say that. Being over 400 Patreon backers is great. Particularly, even though that's still a fraction of the people who interact with us on the regular, it still really makes me feel like we've made some okay choices. Maybe not perfect choices. There's obviously bumps along the road all the time. And also just looking at how much work is starting to spin up in Everything Immersive. Like I said, this is going to be a good newsletter this week. There's a lot last week. It's starting to flow again. A lot of stuff is hitting, the PR inbox right now. And I'm feeling like we're gonna make it. It always does like this. We're like, oh no. And then it happens. And then we keep going. And one day we won't have to worry about it anymore. One day. I'm going to a show tonight. It's been a hot minute. If I saw you there, I hope you said hi. And then you'll be like, why doesn't Noah say anything? Because the podcast comes out on Friday. Well, I'm recording this on a Thursday. So, next week I'll be like, I saw so-and-so there. Wait, but you don't know to say hi to me. That isn't going to do us any good. Look, hopefully you said hi. I'll wait for you to say hi. If I didn't say hi to you, know that I was waiting for you to say hi. There you go. I'm excusing my social awkwardness ahead of time. Ooh, how convenient. I should do this more often. Okay, anyway, the sugar is really kicking in, and I do have to leave in about 10 minutes. So we'll do this in like 2 or 3 minutes. We did put out the call sheet. We did put that out on all our social medias. And seriously, if you have something, send it our way, right? Like, it's best to send it into the email because I work out of email. I don't know. That's enough for now. I wanna get you off and back to what you're supposed to be doing. I gotta get on the road and drive out to North Hollywood because it's a Thursday night and there's a show and I might see you at it. So let's do the credits. There'll be more stuff to talk about. There's some fun stuff in the background. Like I'll bring it all up, and hopefully, like in a week or so, we'll start having some next stage stuff to announce and some speakers. We're starting to line up some fun stuff. So it's one of those weeks. I'm chatty, but I have nothing to talk about. Ugh, the worst. The associate producer, who is not the worst, in fact, is maybe the best of this podcast, is Parker Sella. Music for No Proscenium is by Chris Porter of the Speakeasy Society and Solar the Podcast. So many S's. Why is it got to be so sibilant, guys? Special thanks to Siobhan O'Loughlin. More S's for voicing our intro. This is voiceover humor. Maybe I should do voiceover. Siobhan, should I do voice? The No Pro Podcast is written, edited, hosted, produced, and mixed by yours truly, undiagnosed ADHD guy, Noah Nelson. And until next time, I'll see you at the show.